So in the last video, we talked about the idea of beauty and that it seems harder to find in our modern world. If you haven't seen it, I'll put it up here so you can go watch that first. So then someone asked me a fair question. What even is beauty? And I thought, well, that's pretty easy until I actually tried to answer that and define it and put it into words. Because here's what happens when you try to define beauty. You go in thinking it's a simple aesthetic question. Nice colors, pleasing proportions, a good painting. And then you start pulling the thread, and the thread leads somewhere completely unexpected. It starts to sound less like a design conversation and more like a theological one or a philosophical conversation. In my teens, I picked up Umberto Eco's On Beauty because I was fascinated by the pictures in this book, as well as its sister book called On Ugliness. And over the years, I've kept coming back to them, partly because I thought a man who spent his whole life studying semiotics and medieval philosophy might have a clean answer for me on why I was so fascinated by the ideas held within these pages. He doesn't have a clean answer. Nobody does. But he does something very useful. He lays out thousands of years of humans trying to answer this question. And what strikes you reading it is how consistently across every culture and every era, beauty gets described as something that arrives from outside of us. Not something we invented. It's not something that we've discovered. And even better, we can partake in it with our own creativity. It's that particular thread I've kept pulling on long after I first discovered these books. So here's my little point of view on it. Beauty is not just a sensory experience. It's not just your eyes telling your brain that something is pleasing. It's a signal. It's a transmission traveling along a radio wave. Something that points beyond itself to something bigger. Think about the last time you were genuinely stopped by something beautiful. Not just, politely appreciating it. I mean, you actually completely stopped. You forgot what you were doing. Something within you just went quiet. That's not just neuroscience. It's not just the alpha brainwaves, although it is that too, but it's that moment of being stopped. I think it's kind of like a glimpse of something that exists beyond what we can see, kind of beyond what we can understand, really. The Christian tradition has a long and rich conversation about beauty, and at the center of it is this idea that beauty is not a human invention. It is a quality of God that gets woven into creation. It shows up in human faces, in, a beautiful coastline or a lovely piece of music or in a painting that you love. The way the light falls through a window. And when we encounter these things without distractions, we are briefly touching something true, just for a little moment. Thomas Aquinas, a super brainy Italian friar from the 13th century, wrote about beauty as having three qualities: integrity, harmony, and radiance. And that last word, radiance, is really interesting because radiance implies something shining through, not sitting on the surface, coming from somewhere inside or beyond, and it has an energetic source. You see, I had a spiritual experience in my 20s, and I will tell you the full story in another video because it deserves its own space. But what I'll say here is this. Something happened that completely reorientated how I see the world, and beauty was at the center of it. It's not just a decoration. Beauty is a doorway. It's the thing that cracked me open enough to let something else in. That experience is basically why I paint, why I have such a love for it. It's why this channel exists, really, and it's why I take beauty so seriously. Not as an aesthetic preference, but as something with genuine spiritual weight. So, if beauty is a signal, if it's pointing at something beyond itself, then the people whose job it is to make beautiful things are doing something more than just decorating walls. They're building doorways. And that changes the stakes considerably. It also explains why stripping beauty from our hospitals and our schools and our shared spaces isn't just an aesthetic failure, it's a spiritual one. We're not just removing pleasantness, we're removing the possibility of those small moments of transcendence that remind people in the middle of suffering or fear or, ordinary Tuesday tedium that there is something good and that we have meaning and purpose in this life. There is a Latin phrase called vestigia Dei, and it means traces of God or footprints of God. And it's this whole idea that God leaves traces of himself throughout creation, like little impressions and evidences. I think beauty is one of those footprints. You don't have to believe what I believe to feel it. You just have to have stood in front of something genuinely beautiful and felt that pull that you can't quite put your finger on. That's the footprint. So I want to be clear about something. This channel is not just for artists. The conversation around beauty, what it is, why it matters, what it does to us, that's for everybody. We all live in these spaces. We all feel the absence of it. We all have the ability to cultivate more of it in our lives, and that's a conversation for all of us. But in the next video, I want to zoom in on artists specifically, because if beauty is actually sacred work, if it carries real spiritual weight, then the way an artist thinks about what they're doing changes completely. And I think a lot of artists are walking around not realizing the weight of what they're carrying. So I hope you'll join me for the next video when we can talk a little bit more about that. And if you're enjoying this topic, please subscribe. It's a very new channel, and I'm hoping to grow a lovely community who are into talking about the same things. Anyway, I hope you have a really good day, and I'll see you next time.